Hi, this is Kenny Tan. Welcome to Real Estate License in 14 Weeks. This is episode 7, chapter 2, Ownership and Transfer. When we talk about ownership, it's about how you want the title to appear. See, ordinarily when we buy a piece of property, if we are not sophisticated, all we're asking for is for the title to be under our name. But then there may be some benefits or advantages that you should know about based on the different ways of taking title to a property. For example, if it's a single buyer, if you're buying property for yourself, there is only one way to take title. That is called sole ownership. There's a more technical name for sole ownership. It's called severalty. You know, ordinarily the word several means more than one. But when you add the letters ty to it, it becomes severalty. Well, interestingly, severalty is a terminology that is used to describe a sole ownership. So when a person holds title to a property in severalty, that means that he's the sole owner for the property. One of the questions that they like to ask, or at least one of the understanding they want you to have when you're taking the DI exam, is the term severalty. Severalty means sole ownership. Now, when you own property with someone else, whenever there's two or more person that owns a piece of property, we call that co-ownership. There are different kinds or different ways to hold title as co-owners. Co-owners could be 2, 3, 4, 5, or even more people. Regardless of how many people are the co-owners, there are basically 3 types of co-ownership, 3 to 4 types. The first type is what we call joint tenancy. Joint tenancy is a special type of co-ownership where there is the right to survivorship. What is survivorship? Whenever 2 persons hold title to a piece of property as joint tenants, okay, they have what we call 4 unities. Whenever you're talking about joint tenancy, you got to remember the 4 unities. Without 4 unities, there is no joint tenancy. So before we delve into joint tenancy, let's talk about the 4 unities. Frequently, you'll be tested in the exam on the 4 unities. What are the 4 unities? There is a quick and easy way to remember the 4 unities. I call that TTIP. That's TTIP. In exam, all you need to do is to remember what TTIP stands for. So if you ask in an exam question, what are the 4 unities? Here are the 4 unities. Unity of time, title, interest, and possession. TTIP. Just remember TTIP, you get the question right. But what separates a person who knows about TTIP and a person who knows how to apply TTIP? It's 2 different levels of expertise. A person who simply knows what TTIP is, it's a person who knows enough to pass the exam. A person who knows how to apply TTIP is somebody who is a lot more knowledgeable. Now, what does TTIP really mean? Time, ownership, the unity of time means that you take title at the same time. If A and B takes title at the same time, they have the unity of time. Now, the next is unity of title. If A and B takes title on the same document, in other words, one document has A and B taking title on the same document, that is unity of title. Unity of interest means that the amount of ownership that they have is completely equal. So if 2 persons take title as joint tenants, they have a unity of interest. That means that we have 50 and 50 owner. These 3 people have a unity of interest if each person has a 1/3 interest. So in other words, when you hold title as joint tenants, nobody can have more interest than the other person, whether it's 1/4 interest whenever there are 4 people that hold title to a property, 1/3 interest whenever you have 3 people that hold title, and 1/2 interest whenever you have 2 people that hold title. So when you take title as joint tenant, you don't have to specify how much each person holds because it's assumed to be completely equal. So if John and David takes title as joint tenants, you don't have to specify that John owns 50% and David owns 50% because by being joint tenants, they automatically owns interests that are equal to each other. Now the fourth unity is what we call possession. We'll talk more about unity of possession when we talk about another type of ownership. Well, one of the characteristics of joint tenancy. Joint tenancy's characteristic is that there is a right to survivorship. What that means is if John and David are owners to a property, if David passes away, his interest becomes, let's say if David passes away, his interest becomes John's interest. So that's what right of survivorship means. So unless you want the other owner to have the right to inherit your interest, you don't want to be in a joint tenancy. You want some other type of tenancy. Say, for example, you have a wife and you have children, and you and John get involved with an investment opportunity, taking title as joint tenancy. That means that if you die, your family members, your wife and your kids cannot inherit your interest because John winds up with your interest. I'll give you another example, which is an interesting application of the 4 unities. A mother who came from Taiwan, who brought with her a lot of money that she used to invest in real property. You know, the Chinese has a tradition of leaving their real properties to their children when they passes away. So the mother came over here, initially bought a piece of property in her name as a sole owner. But as she gets older, she started thinking about the kids. What if she passes away? Who does she want to leave the property with? She has a son and a daughter. She likes the son better in the sense that she felt that the son is a more responsible person than the daughter is. She doesn't quite trust her daughter's ability to take care of wealth or to take care of financial matters on her own. So initially, she wanted to transfer title to her son and herself while she's still alive. So her intention is to leave her 50% interest to her son. So she's transferred. In order for there to be a right of survivorship between the mother and the son, one way to do it would be to do a joint tenancy. So initially she would be a grantor, and herself and the son would be grantee. And they both take title to the property at the same time and on the same piece of paper. That means that there is unity of time, title, and interest. So that satisfies the requirement of joint tenancy. Now, if she did it wrong, for example, instead of transferring from herself as grantor to herself and her son as grantee, she instead transferred 50% of her interest to her son on a separate piece of paper. When she bought the property, she got a grant deed, so her interest was created earlier. And now if she transfers the 50% of her interest to her son, which is on a second piece of paper, we don't have unity of time and we don't have unity of title. Therefore, what she has created by transferring 50% of her interest to her son is not a joint tenancy. It is what we call a tenancy in common. So when she passes away, there is no survivorship. So her interest is not her son's interest by way of survivorship. So in order to do that, she needs to make sure she transferred to herself and her son. Now, assuming that she did it the way I suggested, which is to put it on a piece of paper that she and her son are the grantee, and then she transfer her entire interest to both herself and her son. So we got a joint tenancy situation. Now, as the daughter gets older, she becomes more responsible, she becomes more mature. Now, in order for her to transfer her interest and her son's interest to her daughter and make sure that there is the right of survivorship, she needs to prepare a grant deed with herself and her son as grantor, and then with herself, her son, and her sister and her daughter as grantees, because in that way there is unity of time, title, and interest. Now, if she doesn't like her daughter as much, or she's more concerned about her daughter's ability to manage money, she might want to give her daughter a smaller interest. Now, if she gives her daughter a smaller interest, then there is no unity of interest. For example, if she wants her daughter to have 20% interest, she ends up with 40% interest, and her son ends up with 40% interest, the daughter with 20% interest, then there is no joint tenancy between herself, her son, and the daughter, because we don't have unity of interest. 40, 40, and 20 are not the same interest. Okay? So if you are missing any of the unities, there is no joint tenancy. But if that's what she would like to do, that's fine. If she wants to maintain joint tenancy with her son, she's able to, because she has unity of interest, time, and title with her son. Okay, so that's what I mean by joint tenancy and the 4 unities. Now, what would be the benefit of doing a joint tenancy? There are 2 benefits. One is, doing a joint tenancy, you can avoid probate altogether. If you know what probate means, it means that when a person dies, if he doesn't have any living trust, doesn't have any kind of trust, even if he has a will, and if there is no joint tenancy, a person who just died without any of these things would have to have the property be decided by the court. Whereas if the property is under a joint tenancy, there is no need to go through probate. So that's one of the benefits. The second benefit that a person would have in having a joint tenancy would be that it escapes debt. What does that mean? If A and B are both joint tenants, A has a lot of credit card debts, B has no credit card debts. So when A dies, A's interest passes to B because there's the right of survivorship. However, the credit card company for A cannot go after B for A's debts. So that's why another benefit of joint tenancy is that it escapes debt. There are 2 important things I want to add to joint tenancy. Number 1, you cannot transfer a joint tenancy, any interest in joint tenancy, by will. So in other words, if you have a joint tenancy with another person, you cannot set up a will to transfer your interest in that joint tenancy to your family members, for example. The second thing I want to add is that a corporation cannot be involved in a joint tenancy because a corporation is not a natural person. A corporation doesn't die. Next, we want to talk about tenancy in common. Tenancy in common is a little different than joint tenancy in the sense that it only requires 1 unity. That is the unity of possession. So what does unity of possession really mean? To give you an example, A and B are both tenants in common. They take title as tenants in common. A lives in the United States. B lives in China. So the law says if you are tenants in common, you are both equally responsible for the expenses of the property. Now, if A lives on the property, the question is, can B, who lives in China, for example, require A to pay rent to B? No. A doesn't pay rent to B because they have equal right of possession. And that's how you apply the unity of possession. So A doesn't have to pay rent to B. In addition, A can occupy the entire property without paying any rent to B, and B cannot limit A to just using 50% of the property, for example. Okay, so that is the nature of a tenancy in common. This concludes episode 7 of Starting from Zero. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. If you want to receive future notification of new releases of my videos, please remember to subscribe and then hit the bell so you can get the first notification of my releases. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.